So I'm Johan Gous, I'm the Head of Advice at Sasfin Wealth, and I really want to thank you for attending this session today, taking time out of your busy schedules, but I do really believe that you're going to find what we've got to share today worthwhile. Sometimes it's good for us just to stop doing what we're doing and just to take some time out and just kind of like check where we are, and then also how we need to adjust to be more efficient in whatever we do and what our roles require from us. And I think it's especially true in this post-COVID time that we're living through. I think everybody is still trying to find their way. Sometimes we're not honest with ourselves that we actually don't yet know exactly how to handle this new world of work. And I think for me, it's not just about all the change that we've seen and all these boundaries that shifted between personal and work life. We were talking about it earlier this morning. Where's the time that you actually drove to work, you did your work, where there was all the other people around you, you could have proper interpersonal connection and discussions and share ideas, and then the days of the desktop where you could switch off your desktop, get in your car, go home, have that bit of a break before you can sit down, at the dinner table. It's all the stuff that I think, we have lost a few things on the way. And it's especially for us as business leaders and managers, it has become very, very challenging to try and navigate this world as well. But why are we having this workshop today? I think it's because really it comes down to one thing. We are fighting a war in the workplace at the moment, and it's a very unique war. Reason being that, first of all, the enemy is not always visible. And the people that is getting injured in the process, or the casualties of war, don't even really recognize what's happening to them, or they don't want to admit that something is happening to them. And I think the last thing important is that how do we fight this war? You can't fight it with bandages and vaccines. You need more than that. You need the elements of purpose, of feeling connected, of compassion, and just care and support and counseling, right? Those are the kind of skills which I think has become the new skills that leaders need to adapt. And that is what we're trying to do. We're trying to get organizations to develop a culture of care and wellness. So us as leaders and managers, we are responsible for the valuable human capital in our businesses. And it's that human capital that needs to constantly deliver on a day-to-day basis the promise to our clients, right? And therefore, I think, it's important for us as business leaders and managers to also start with ourselves, right? Where are we on this journey before we can even think about how do we help the people that's working in our organization? And that is a big part of what this morning is all about. So just quickly to give you some statistics to make it a little bit clearer what I'm really trying to, the picture I'm trying to portray here. If you look at the latest Fed Health Wellness Survey, there's a few very scary statistics. The first one is basically that mental health admissions is the highest this year than it's been in all previous years. The second one is that depression is the most prevalent admission category, and the average length of an admission is about 11 days. So think about that in terms of, there's the human element to it, but think about it in terms of productivity in the workplace as well. 67% of admissions are females, and the average age of patients admitted are 40.3 years. Who are these people? It's those people that's in the middle of their careers and that still has another 20 to 25 years that they need to be productive and be able to contribute to the economy and make lives for themselves. And then the top 5 issues of concern for those affected are really, make it 6, anxiety, depression, work stress, financial stress, and then self-esteem or the lack thereof, and then finally something is very basic, as sleep. So really what it all comes down to is that we've decided to have this workshop and cover quite a few topics. And the topics will really speak to what we can call the integrated employee wellness proposition. These are the kind of things that we as employers and leaders in our businesses need to try and establish for our employees. It covers all the things from retirement benefits to learning and development, financial planning, the medical, the health kind of side of things, but also then very important, and that's where we're going to spend a lot of time this morning, is around the mental and emotional wellness, and then just things like mentoring and coaching. Some of the stuff that got lost where young people don't get that kind of exposure by not being in a face-to-face situation with leaders in the organization. So we're going to cover all those different topics, and we've got specialists which you will find are very passionate about these specific areas of expertise in the business. So on the agenda today, we're going to start off basically with employee benefits. We've got Guy Tillett here, who's from Prism Employee Benefits. Then we're going to talk about the medical aid and health insurance side of things with Charlene here from Sasfin Health Consulting. And then I will speak to you a little bit about the retirement investment space as also from an asset consulting perspective. What we've said to ourselves is we want to really try and keep these first few sessions very short, so about 15 minutes, let's say, around for each speaker, and then we're going to have a brief break, and then it's really going to come down to what we really wanted to focus on this morning, and that is we've got Angela here today, Angela de Longchamp. She's from Inspired Leadership Development, and she's going to be talking to this very, very important topic of how do we start getting ourselves going again in this new world of work. And then we'll have some time for questions and answers, and then we'll close out. But just to get straight into it, our first speaker today is Guy Tillett from Prism Employee Benefits. So Guy is the co-founder and director of Prism Employee Benefits, and he's going to share a little bit more about the way in which they approach the advice when it comes to clients from an employee benefits perspective. And he'll also talk about himself and his background a bit. And then, we have got some mutual clients that we service with Guy, and it really is amazing to see the professional way in which they handle the clients and how they also take them on this journey to make sure that we deliver on the proposition for our members of our retirement funds. So thank you very much, Guy, for being with us this morning, and handing straight over to you.
So this scares me already, but I'm sure I'll get there. Johan, thanks very much for that very kind intro. As you said, I think today is not about any specific component of what you had up on the screen just now. It's more about putting it all together and understanding what benefit employer groups like yourselves can get out of it. You spoke about us losing our way earlier on. I think about myself. My son's busy writing matric at the moment. And certain mornings he's got to be at school by 6 o'clock for extra lessons prior to the school starting. So I get up at 5:30, and I think, you know what, I'm not going to shower yet. I'll just take him to school. I'll put on a pair of shorts and a jersey, and off I go. Drop him at 6 o'clock, get back by 6:15. I think, you know what, I'm not going to shower yet. I'm just going to quickly catch up with my computer and see what emails I've got first thing in the morning. And I get involved in the emails. And then I suddenly realize I've got a 9 o'clock in Olifantsfontein, and it's now 8:15, and I've got to shower quickly. So you jump into the shower, put your clothes on, get into the car and rush out. It's that type of thing where I think we have lost our way. We've got too involved, and we're making ourselves too available to technology and requirements and needs of clients and members out there, which is not a bad thing, but where do we draw the line? It's just a simple example of where I think I personally lost the way. But anyway, so be it. But guys, thanks very much for your time. You can see who I am and where I'm from. I think, I've learned a lot over the years with regards to, I'll just press the arrow button, I presume.
So you pressed, there we go.
Okay. We've been doing this since 1994. At that stage, I was involved with Liberty Life. My partner in the business, who's still a partner in the business, Gary Vandenberg, had started Prism Employee Benefits. And I was calling on him as a consultant, and we kept saying at that particular point in time, there's something missing in this employee benefits industry. When I talk about employee benefits, we talk about retirement funding, we talk about group risk, i.e. life cover, disability, funeral, whatever it might be. And what was missing, and what we picked up very early on in our careers, was the situation with independence. Okay, you go out and you've got a solution from and I say this with the utmost respect, from a life office, whether it be Mutual, Sanlam, Liberty Life, Alexander Forbes, one of the bigger guys out there, and they put a provision or a solution on the table for a particular client. Okay, you come to that solution, you say to yourself, is that a truly independent solution for that client? At that point in time, all those years ago, we realized it wasn't. We weren't knocking it because it was working and it was doing the job and it was putting retirement away for members, etc., etc. But it wasn't the independence that we foresaw would come into the industry over all these years. So at that particular time, we then decided to become completely and vehemently independent, and we became independent consultants to the retirement fund industry. What did that mean? The bigger life officers frowned upon it. They said, what are you guys doing? Because we have the right solution. We're saying, but it's not the right solution for the employer groups and the members. Are you giving them the best value for money? Are you giving them the best possible admin platform? Are you giving them the best possible solution that in 25, 30, 35 years' time, it's going to make a difference to them? We didn't believe so at that point in time, and we still don't believe so. Yes, the industry has changed a lot. It has. There's no question about it. Where certain life officers are now offering slightly more independent approaches to client bases. But is it independent in the true sense from a cost perspective? No, because if you look at that diagram up there and you look at the middle red section, what happens there is you've got a life office sponsored umbrella fund. Okay, whether it be Mutual, Super Fund, Sanlam Umbrella Fund, Liberty Corporate Selection Fund, Alexander Forbes Umbrella Fund, whatever it might be, you've got that umbrella fund. But what happens around that umbrella fund? You've got the same provider providing the consulting services. You've got the same provider providing the risk. You've got the same provider providing asset management and consulting. So is that the truly independent solution that the client and the member should have? We still believe no. Okay. So once again, I'm not knocking it because it's worked and it's a solution and it has done what it's meant to do. But could you do better? We say that from an independence perspective, that center component there, the umbrella fund, in our mind, should be a non-perverse, non-sponsored umbrella fund. In other words, with no linkage to any of the life officers, with the ability to be able to outsource the risk to wherever it makes sense, the investment to wherever it makes sense. And I mean, on the investment front, Johan's consulting team, remember they are consultants, they're not asset managers. Johan's consulting team and ourselves have worked together and very closely for a number of years now. And we've realized the independence that we bring to the party, because it's not just about a Sasfin or a Prism or a Liberty or a Mutual. It's about what can we get throughout the market which is going to do the best thing for that particular set of members. So I think that graph there, or that diagram, typically illustrates where we do things slightly differently. Yes, there are other people that do it like this, but there's a handful. Okay, so risk, for example. If you're an inclusively costed fund, in other words, your costs come off whatever the retirement fund contribution might be from the employer and both the employee, it affects that retirement outcome. You've got to make sure you're getting the best possible rate for what the benefit is for that particular set of members so that they are optimizing their retirement. We do that on an annual basis. We go to market. We go to the 10 top risk providers and we say, guys, what can you give us for this profile of membership? And through COVID, that proved to be the correct thing to do, because you had particular funds out there that were putting increases of 20 to 30% into their risk benefits, which we said is unreasonable over the short term. Yes, you may lose money in the first 12 months. Absolutely, you might be losing money on that membership base. But over a 5-year period, are you making money on that client? 9 times out of 10, you will be making money out of the client, as long as you keep your rates reasonable. And our system, by going to market on an annual basis for clients, puts that pressure on the incumbent and whoever else may come into the mix to make sure they're giving a reasonable rate over the long term. This industry has become too fixated on what's happened this last year. Too fixated. It cannot work like that. You've got to look at a longer term. So, when risk is a big one. I mean, asset management is another big one. Whether it's Sasfin, Ellen Gray, Coronation. Remember, I'm independent, so I can talk to anybody out there. It doesn't matter who it is. Are they providing decent amount of return compared to an acceptable level of risk with regards to the mandate of that portfolio? That's really the big question. Some guys will say, wow, we sat and we read the Sunday Times and they saw somebody was doing 22% growth over the last 12 months. Well, that's great. We're happy for that. But how much risk has been taken to achieve that? And over the longer term, is it that much far ahead of the actual mandate or the peer average? Those are the type of things you've got to look at, where the independent model that we put forward will do that automatically. Because remember, all of this comes at a risk to either the trustee board or the management committee on that fund. They are responsible for those members. So if we're not, from a governance perspective, I'm jumping ahead of my slides now, but I'm just talking as I think. From a governance perspective, the right thing to do as an employer on behalf of your members is to make sure that whether you've been with a provider for the last year or 10 years, are you still correctly placed? Because you may be, which is fantastic. If you're not, now's the time to make that change. Because that change, the sooner you make it, the sooner it's going to benefit those members over the longer term. All right. So as I said, I think I've jumped ahead a bit on my slides here, but that gives you a bit of an idea on who Prism are and how we do things. Now, employee benefits, okay, we talk about why. It's one of the smaller components of that total solution that Johan was referring to earlier on. But it is part of employee wellness. There's no question about it. You know, if you've got a member, staff member that's been with you for 10, 15, 20 years, and there's no value that they can see that they've got out of that employer group over that period of time, well, what's the point? We go back 25, 30 years ago when I got involved in this business. There were very few employer groups that had this type of structure in place for many reasons. Trust, member trust, they didn't. If you gave 10 Rand to a fund, you never got a benefit statement for the next 2, 3, 4 years, however long it was, you didn't trust the system. You didn't trust what the employer was trying to do for you. So the employer just did it on the basis of, let's just deduct contributions, but the members don't understand. They become a little anxious about it. We're not being communicated to. We don't understand what we've got. So it automatically, indirectly starts affecting the wellness of that employee and further on their families. Because if something goes wrong with that employee, whether they, God forbid, pass away or become disabled or one of their members, their family members pass away, where is the assistance going to come from if they don't understand what they've got in the first place? Yes, it has changed. 24 years later, things have changed. There's no question about it. And that's only because particular entities like ourselves are making funds, companies, and employees aware of what the extra structures are about. Communication is vital. If you can't communicate directly with members, and guys, you probably think it's okay, but it isn't. A lot of employer groups out there don't allow the likes of ourselves to communicate with members for whatever reason. And that's where we're picking up an issue in this industry. Where they do allow us to communicate, things work fantastically well. Okay, because that communication means, guys, or HR, payroll, whoever it might be, that's actually not your responsibility, but yes, you'll be aware of what we're doing. We have to be able to communicate directly with those members through technology, your phones, your computers, whatever it may be, on a confidential basis and on an open forum basis. So that's where we make a massive difference. I mean, you look at families' wellness as well. How many times do you might not see it too much on a daily or a weekly or a monthly basis, but how many times do we see where a fund structure with their risk benefits and retirement have made a difference to families? If somebody's passed away, how that makes a difference. If somebody has become disabled, how it's kept that family morale together because they're still receiving an income. If somebody retires, that, you know what, we actually got something to retire with. You must remember the culture in this country has changed a lot over the last 24, 25 years. Many years ago, people relied on families to keep them going post-retirement. We can't do that anymore. Things have changed. Cultures have changed. We've progressed. So those types of things we've got to keep in mind when we talk about the wellness of what we're trying to achieve out of retirement funding and risk benefit provision to employer groups and your staff. And I mean, from a governance perspective, I think I mentioned it earlier. You might be in the right place at the moment as an employer group. You may be, and that's fantastic. But is there a problem with checking that and making sure that you are on the right track? Absolutely not. Remember, from our perspective, we are completely independent. So when we come and consult to a client from a fund perspective, we say, right, this is what you've got. We're an independent consultant. We will do a full rebroke for you and show you what the market can offer. We're not holding a gun to any employer's head saying, you need to move because we think you're in the wrong place or we know you're in the wrong place. All we're saying is, guys, here's a document. Have a look at what industry can offer. Do you think you're in the right neck of the woods or not? If you're not, that's a call the employer needs to make. I think in a nutshell, without taking too much more time, that's really where we believe from a wellness perspective to employers and their staff, we have made a difference over the last 24 years because we've done things differently. And we will hit the market hard. I mean, life officers will tell you, they know of Prism. They know of Prism employee benefits and where we have typically rocked the boat a bit because of what we've gone to clients with. But we're rocking the boat for the right reason. Okay, for the simple fact is, if you haven't had the fund investigated over the last 10 years, I can tell you now, there's a better alternative out there. Absolutely there will be, because the industry moves on, it changes. All right, so that, guys, that's my 5 cents worth in a very short time, just to give you a quick overview. And Johan, Charlene, thanks very much for the opportunity. If you've got any questions, we can have a chat a bit later. Thanks so much. All right.
Good morning, everybody, and thanks again for joining us today. It makes it a lot easier to stand up here and see some faces that I recognize and that are smiling at me. So thank you. So I'm not going to tell you how long I've been in this industry, but I do want to say that over the years that I have been working, or this journey as a healthcare consultant, there's been significant change in terms of employee benefits, specifically in terms of the provision of healthcare benefits. When I did start my journey, really we were here to give advice to companies around what medical scheme and or possibly what gap product to offer their employees. And that's pretty much where our role ended. With the change in culture within businesses as well as the leadership, our services have had to expand to include things like alternative, affordable solutions to medical schemes, which normally take the form of health insurance. Things that often are referred to as primary health care or healthcare, and most recently they were referring to this low-cost income products. And then employee physical or psychological well-being, and then on-site support. And this on-site support can either be in the frame of occupational health clinics, primary health clinics, or on-site counselling sessions. And there's a number of other services that we offer on-site. So what has driven this change? Primarily, I think it's the realization that employees who felt appreciated and knew that their needs were being considered by the employers showed greater loyalty, increased productivity, and were absent from work less. And I know Johan, as well as Guy, mentioned what COVID's done. It really has thrown a spanner in the works. So with the move to more hybrid working models, and a couple of the people that I spoke to before the session started have highlighted that where people are preferring to work from home, how do you know what's going on in their world? And this has really introduced additional challenges that companies are now trying to navigate and find solutions for. How do they entrench their culture when in some cases they don't even see the member or the employee? And how do they provide support if they're not able to see that the member needs help? So today, what I'm going to go through briefly is the challenges being faced by employees and how companies can provide solutions or support to address these challenges. Okay, let's see, has it gone? Oh. There we go. So the current challenges being faced by employees that have a direct impact on companies include financial challenges, and I think we all agree that the economy is not helping with those challenges that we're all facing. Health, and with health, it's not just the physical side, so medical scheme, getting ill, but really more importantly these days is the mental health or well-being of individuals. And then from a personal perspective, so the employee well-being companies or programs that we work with have identified that the main reasons why employees access support is because of financial strain, personal relationships, and then anxiety and stress. These factors have a direct impact on both absenteeism and presenteeism. And presenteeism is probably the hardest to actually gauge or monitor because the person is at work or at the laptop at home, and you don't actually realize that they're not providing the necessary value. So that's why it's very difficult to manage. And then this obviously has a direct impact on the service or the quality standards that are delivered to clients, which could impact the company's brand, but definitely will impact productivity and ultimately profitability of a company. So what are therefore the consequences of not having support systems or products or solutions in place for your employees? By having context in terms of the costs associated with rising burden of disease, absenteeism, and mental health prevalence to your company, you can then calculate what it would cost you by not having the solution, or what is these three things costing your company currently, and by putting a solution in place, what is the return of investment that you will be able to receive? So in terms of rising burden of disease, the growth in NCDs, which is non-communicable diseases, is really things like high blood pressure, diabetes, things that you can control, often lifestyle related, but if you get the right treatment, are controllable and you can still be extremely productive. NCDs have an impact of about 37% on productivity. And in terms of that, at least 20% of your unskilled workforce are either living with diabetes and are unaware of it or not receiving treatment. This not only obviously impacts the person's quality of life, but if that is your driver that's delivering documents, driving a vehicle like a truck, or even your forklift, if that person's eyesight is being affected, or they should go into diabetic shock, the impact to the business from a costing and the bottom line is humongous. Absenteeism. So what has been noted is that there's a higher frequency, so the number of times people that use public services need to go to a doctor in a year compared to those that use the private sector. Absenteeism also obviously increases the pressure on others to fill the gap, in particular if you're in the manufacturing industry, where if a person is not in the line, that line just doesn't move. And then obviously productivity. So it's been estimated, depending on what report and survey you look at, that absenteeism costs our economy, South Africa, between 12 and 19 billion rand annually. I mean, those are extremely big numbers, so really to maybe put it in a bit more acceptable or that you can commute, is that on any given day, approximately 15% of your employees or the employees in South Africa are not at work. So if you've got accurate absenteeism stats, you can actually put a figure to that. Unfortunately, again, with hybrid working models, sometimes we don't know that somebody isn't working. And therefore, that number that you can calculate could actually be bigger. In terms of mental health prevalence, and I think this is probably the one that's the most burning at the moment. Physical disabilities, etc., you can see. Unfortunately, with mental health, people can hide it. I can arrive at work with a big smile on my face and nobody knows that I need support. So the increasing number of employees that are reporting that they're anxious and stressed at work, so that's hugely in South Africa. Whilst this is a global issue, we are seeing a lot more concentrated. I think it's also got to do with a lot of the stuff that we're dealing with in South Africa that's exacerbating our mental health and our stress levels. But of these people reporting that they are feeling anxious and needing support, only 27% of them actually are getting it. This undiagnosed or untreated mental health conditions are costing us approximately, according to health economists, 161 billion rand annually, which is approximately 3.4% of our GDP. So really, there's definitely a need for proactive support interventions. So mental health in South Africa, according to a VIT study that was released in November last year, showed that close on 26% of South Africans show signs of depression. This has, and they've also picked up, and I don't think it's new to anybody, that there's a direct correlation between mental health and physical health. So when you are suffering from mental health and stress, often it does show in heart conditions, pains on chests and things like that, but definitely has an increase in substance abuse. In terms of the Sanlam reports, in 2020, they showed that in terms of their disability claims, mental health accounted for 19% in 2020, up from 11% in 2019. So again, these members aren't able to work any longer, but also in terms of your group risk quotes, those rates that you're paying will also increase if you're not managing the mental health within your companies. This is then reinforced by what we're seeing in the medical schemes, and Johan shared a couple of stats in terms of Fed Health, but across the medical schemes they're showing that depression is the leading reason for hospitalization, and the average stay is approximately 11 days. As Johan rightfully mentioned or highlighted, was that This then is for 11 days that person's not at the office, but normally they haven't been present for a few days, if not longer months before that, and they're not going to return back to work after the 11 days hospitalization. So the impact to companies is a lot longer than 11 days. So what should we be doing? So I believe that, first of all, just like, and if we look back a couple of years with HIV, people were not receiving treatment for HIV because there was such a huge stigma around it. So first thing in terms of mental health is remove the stigma. If people are more comfortable to disclose that they are battling, they will then receive the right treatment, which then will bring them back to work and become a healthier, better, well-rounded person. And by doing that, or how do we do it? Obviously changing the narrative. A lot of us, in all the media articles all around, fixating on mental illness instead of looking at it from let's stay mentally well. So if we change that, just like we do with the physical stuff, if you eat correctly, exercise, your physical, you won't hopefully get the chronic conditions. Just with mental health, if you stay mentally well. So let's look at prevention instead of having the hospitalization for 11 days when it becomes out of control. And then how do companies provide support? Because just, unfortunately, there is still a stigma. So people aren't always comfortable to come to managers or HR or human capital to say, I need help. Because they believe that could count against them. If you can't manage your stress, then can you get that promotion? Is to have independent outside companies running it, where it's confidential, the member or your employee feels comfortable to put up their hand, phone that number, and get the help that they need. And then let's look at the physical side. So what are the key trends we're seeing in terms of primary health insurance, so in that uncovered market? And I know, because we are dealing with a lot of companies where they're saying to us, our employees are saying they cannot afford medical aid, and they want to move from a participation policy of being compulsory membership to voluntary. However, it's very interesting to see that in the stats, or what's coming out when you look at those people that are currently not on medical aid, one, they rank healthcare or healthcare provision number 4 on the hierarchy of needs. 80% of this market access primary healthcare, out-of-pocket expenses, and they use approximately 97% of their budget that they've put aside for healthcare to access things like, or services like GPs, medication. So what you see is, whilst they might not be paying for in contributions towards a medical aid or a PHI or health insurance, they could be actually spending more out of pocket than they are or would be if they had a solution in place. Okay. And then in addition, these kind of solutions also allow or take away that frustration of accessing care through either the public or even the private sector. And often they only go and see doctors when they're really, really ill. Whereas products like PHI or primary health insurance products allow them to get access to chronic medication on a monthly basis, dentistry, optometry. So again, holistically making sure that they don't get to the point where they're extremely ill. They're managing their conditions. So I think we've shared a few staggering stats, and I think that's why a lot of companies are saying or asking themselves, can we afford not to do something? Because one, do we understand the cost to our company at the moment? And is there something that we can do to take away the burden of our employees and also make it more productive or beneficial to us? So based on the cost that we've shared, in terms of not having access to support, in my mind it's evident that it's not any longer just a social responsibility to offer, for example, medical cover or health insurance to your people and mental health support, but a commercial imperative for employers. So this infographic really just, what I wanted to illustrate is that it's not any longer a one-size-fits-all. We cannot just have one option medical schemes. We need to look at what is the affordability entry points for your employees and what benefits do they need to obtain. And there are definitely more products in the market or solutions that can meet the various entry levels in terms of benefit requirements, as well as how much can a person afford and a company. And then this is all underpinned by employee well-being program to look at the holistic person. And Angela will go through in a bit more detail how we can also look at putting in other, it doesn't just have to be employee well-being product or program. It could be things that you introduce within a company as a beginning. Just to add though, your primary health insurance products have also come to realize that mental health is a huge issue in South Africa. So many of them do have built into the product some kind of EAP or employee support. Normally telephonic, but at least there is something that those people can phone in terms of financial, so budgets, as well as for psychological support, so if they're needing somebody to talk to in terms of something that's happened, as well as their mental well-being. So that's healthcare and what we can do and how we can support our employees and your members and your employees into the future. Thank you very much.
Great, thank you very much for that, Charlene, and also for you, Guy, for giving us a few perspectives from an employee benefits side of things. So basically, before the break, I'm just going to touch on one other element in terms of this employee wellness proposition. And really, it comes down to how do we create better outcomes for retirement fund members. So I always run the risk of having too much to say, but I'm going to try and just keep it as quick as possible and just like at a high level. We will also be sharing all these slides with you, and we'll also share a copy of the video that we're actually doing at the moment. And so just focus pretty much on some of the key things that I just want to highlight this morning. I think maybe just to start off with, what is the role of an asset consultant? Well, we basically see ourselves as translators. We are the people that's sitting between what a retirement fund wants to achieve from an investment perspective for their members on the one side, and then the solutions and the asset managers on the other side. And we try and make sure that whatever the asset managers do for the fund is in line with what the investment objectives of the fund is all about. So if we talk about the financial wellness of our members or our staff, it basically comes down to three main components. So this is just basically your normal financial planning picture that you would look at. So the first element is really around what we'll call wealth protection, and Charlene has spoken to a big part of that, the healthcare cover, and Guy has alluded to some of the rest of it. It's your life cover, disability, income protection. So that's the first key element. You always start first with protecting your personal finances, looking at these different elements. Then it's about wealth creation. It's about the savings, the investments, and the biggest part of that would be our retirement, and that is the part that I will focus on a little bit more in what I'm going to talk to now. And the last element is also what we'll call your wealth preservation. It doesn't help you save as much as you can and all of that, and the day that you pass away, your affairs are not in order, you haven't got a will, you haven't done proper estate planning, and you're paying much more tax than you need to, and you leave a mess for the people that's staying behind to sort out. So those are the three elements, but I'm going to focus on the retirement side of things. So the key challenge when it comes to retirement is about trying to bridge this retirement funding gap. We always hear about this statistic that says only 6 people out of 100 will have sufficient money to actually live off in retirement. There's a lot of people that will be partially self-sufficient, but also still depend on government, the social, the institutions out there, and then also their families, right? So if you start thinking about legacy, wouldn't the biggest challenge for us be to leave a legacy where our children do not have to actually look after us? But that's not the reality, people. We are living in the sandwich, and I sometimes think Dagwood generation, where you are not only looking after your parents, but also your children, and maybe eventually further down the line, even to an extent, their children. So what I really want to talk to is just a few key elements that could help us to try and bridge this retirement funding gap. And I'll share with you some of the things that we look at as asset consultants when we provide services to our clients. Let's start off first of all, by looking at some of the key pillars of a healthy employer retirement fund. And it's just kind of like building on some of the stuff that Guy has mentioned before. And the first that you'll start off with is whatever we do as service providers and as a management committee or a board of trustees for retirement fund members is to really do everything for those members. Everything we do must be focused on them. And then very important is to have a well-informed and balanced and educated board of trustees or management committee. And I would typically like to see human capital representatives on those management committees to represent the people in the business. And that's what we, for example, have in our Sasfin Staff Retirement Fund. We do have human capital representatives on that management committee. Then what you need is experienced and independent service providers. Guy explained to you why. There's two models in our industry. There's the one-stop shop, and I'm not going to mention the service providers, but you get everything in that one place. And then you get the integrated independent model, and that is what we have created from a Sasfin perspective, working, for example, with people like Prism, where we kind of like keep each other true. We work together as a team, but we keep each other true, and we can go and select the best service providers out there, be it risk, be it healthcare, be it investments. And then also to make sure that there's an appropriately priced service offering from a fees and a premium perspective, because ultimately, once you've deducted all those costs, you have to start thinking about what it actually is costing the employees and how much better we could have done for them over a 20, 30, 40-year period. Then very important from an investment perspective, the fund has to have very clear objectives in terms of what it wants to achieve for the members, and I'll speak to that a bit more, and what are the performance measures to know that they are actually achieving that. And then also the need for a very robust investment strategy, which I'll also touch on in a second, but then which is captured in your investment policy statement. Again, some of the, let's call it, some of the more clinical elements of a retirement fund solution would be your administration capability. It's very important that you have a 13B administration capability that can actually provide the functionality that you need to implement certain elements of your investment strategy, and also things like cyber risk, which has become a real issue, and the protection of members' data. And then also this very important issue about, on an ongoing basis, being able to measure how well or ill prepared your members are for retirement. And we call that the net replacement ratio exercise that we'll typically do on an annual basis for members to be able to see how much more do they still need to save in order to make sure that they've got enough at retirement. And then the last two elements, effective member communication. Guy said it. If there's something that is so critical, is this issue about telling members where they are, so that they can make informed decisions and have proper discussions with their financial planners, because you have to see the bigger picture, and then the education strategy as well. And then the last element is just your benefit counseling and human capital support, to have all of that in place as well. So those are some of the key things that I would think that forms part of a healthy employee retirement fund. So if we look at your retirement fund journey, then the kind of solution that we would typically present to our clients is a solution where, first of all, you've got your retirement fund in place that members are contributing to every month. But then on top of that, should members leave and they go to another employer, that you'll have the preservation fund in that same overall retirement fund solution, where they don't have to switch to other platforms. It's a seamless transfer from wherever they had their savings into a preservation fund, and where they are also able to make additional contributions over and above the normal required contributions that they make through the company, where they can then save in addition to that. So this is how they build then up to retirement, and then when at the time comes when they actually go into retirement, that again they will have a seamless transition from pre-retirement into post-retirement. That is so important, and I'll speak to that in a second as well, but where they have the different annuity options, being a living, a life annuity, or a hybrid annuity, which is one of the new kind of developments in the industry. And just supporting this model would again be something that Guy mentioned, sound governance. And I do think there are a lot of companies that is not really necessarily meeting that requirement. and where the employee benefit consultant can play a key role in making sure that it happens. The cost effectiveness I've spoken to, and also the fact that you have to have the relevant investment administration capabilities, the independence of the service providers to support this whole model, and then finally, what I also feel very strong about is a very dynamic life stage model. So if we talk about this life stage model, again, I'm giving you some idea about the way that we approach a life stage model. So Regulation 28 requires that every company has a default life stage model, that whatever members come in, everybody automatically goes into this model. So in this model that you see there, typically members should, up to, and in our model, this is specific to the kind of model that we suggest as the most preferred model, up to about 7 years before normal retirement age, a member should typically be invested in a high equity multi-asset class fund that's Regulation 28 compliant. And this then becomes a very critical point in the journey for a retirement fund member, because at that point in time, they have to make one fundamental decision. Are they going to go down the life annuity path, which is the guaranteed income that you can get by buying a life annuity from a life company? And why this decision is important at that 7 years before retirement is because if they're going to go that route, then you need to take that member in the last few years from this high equity, higher risk kind of solution where you've got more equity exposure in the market. You've got to transition that member down to a safer kind of option, like, for example, a low-risk income portfolio, so that when they hit retirement, there's no risk of the last day before they retire, the market dropping, and the next day they can only buy, or they'll be able to buy less of an income than a day before. So that is the kind of model, a very smooth transition that you can do. If the member says, well, I'm not going to buy a life annuity, I'm going to buy a living annuity, because this would have come from a discussion that they would most probably have with their financial planner. And that's why, very important again, the communication with members. By the time they have a discussion with their financial planner, then they should be able to say to the financial planner, this is my situation, right, from where I am in my company retirement fund. If they then decide they're going to go the living annuity route, the member would typically, at 7 years before retirement, opt out of the default life stage model, not go down this de-risking path, and carry on in that multi-asset high equity portfolio, and then go into a living annuity. This picture is really just a summary of the latest World Economic Forum Global Risk Report, and you don't have to worry too much about the detail on the right there. It's just saying that the world that we live in is becoming increasingly complex and interconnected. Just think about what we've lived through in the last few years. We've had the COVID pandemic. We had war in Ukraine, which is still continuing. We had supply chain disruptions, which caused multi-decade high inflation rates and a rapid increase in interest rates, the cost of living kind of crisis, and all these, and then the slowdown in our economy. So these are all very complex things that's impacting on each other, and that is interconnected. So how do you actually invest on behalf of retirement fund members in such type of environment? Well, you must have an investment strategy that are able to deal with all these complexities and provide the proper returns in a sustainable manner. The good news is that the world around us is changing, and there are more solutions available out there. So in the investment industry, for example, you've got more investment instruments that are available to asset managers like ourselves as well, to design and develop investment strategies that is cost effective, right? If we just think about Regulation 28 from a regulatory perspective, how things have improved. You know, the industry is always asked, give us more tools and more leeway to manage our clients' money that are in retirement funds, because Regulation 28 was quite restrictive. So in the last year or two, we've seen that your ability to invest offshore has been increased from 30% to 45%. You can now invest in infrastructure investments. You can now have more exposure to private equity and hedge funds. Things that a few years ago people would say, what are these private equity hedge? It's become much more mainstream, and it's become much more regulated. So you can bring those elements into your portfolio. And that's where the good news is. You've got more potential sources of of returns. You've got more geographic and currency diversification, and you've also got strategies to manage your portfolio risk, something which I'll come back to in a second, which Guy also mentioned, that it's not returns at all cost. So all these instruments and opportunities are now available to actually manage portfolio risk and get better outcomes for our members. I want to touch on three things that is important. The only three things that members really need to be made aware of and educated on. And the first one is really just to say that they need to take sufficient investment risk. They must understand the difference between risk and volatility, which I'll explain in a second. They need to capitalize on the power of compound growth by staying invested and taking the sufficient risk. And they need to preserve. They must not touch their savings. And I'll come back to that again when we talk about the new two-pot system that is about to be introduced. So just to unpack these three elements a bit, I'm going to start off with what I call the law of investments. So the same as you've got the law of gravity, right? You've got the law of investments. And it consists of three components that will help you to achieve investment success for our retirement fund members. And those three components are return, risk, and time. And it basically goes like this. The higher the returns that you need, the more risk you must take. But the longer the time you allow, the better you'll be able to manage that risk and get the returns that you need. Okay, so very simple. That is the law of investments. You can't get away from it. So once you understand the interconnectedness between those three elements, and your asset manager can basically use those elements, then you're on the right path. So let's talk about this, understanding this difference between what is volatility and what is risk. So a bit of a busy picture, but if you look at the top graph that goes up, that is your, let's say, your multi-asset high equity portfolio. That will go up and down depending on what the markets does. But that is not the real risk. That is just volatility, the movement of your portfolio. The real risk is that you do not take sufficient risk in terms of the investment portfolio that you invested in, and that you do not keep up with the rising cost of living. So in real terms, you go backwards because you're not willing to take the risk that you need to. Right at the bottom, you'll see that it says that the longer the investment period, the more risk you can afford to take. So it's not about the risk that you as a member think you want to take, it's the risk you can afford to take. And again, if you think about retirement funds investments, you're talking 20, 30, 40 years. So you've got time. You must just make use of that time. And then a very important element is this issue about emotional self-destruction. We are human beings, which makes us great from a creative perspective and being able to relate to others and give us color to our personalities. But it can also work against us. Every time that the market goes through a bad time, we sometimes feel like we have to do something, we have to move. And in our game, we say sometimes the best thing to do is to do nothing. Most of the times for a retirement fund member that's got this long-term horizon is to do nothing, because the difference that then develops if you do react every time and you move from your high equity portfolio to a lower or safer option or money market, you click for touch. Once you've clicked for touch, there's no game happening. You can't grow your money, right? Your money goes into a neutral space. So what the market can give you and what you get as a result of your own emotional behavior is very different in the end, and you don't achieve your investment objectives in the long run. The one other element that Guy specifically mentioned was this issue about returns and the risk you're taking in getting those returns. So if I show you this picture and I ask you, would you rather be, if you look at the x-axis, the bottom horizontal axis, it's your risk, the y-axis is your return. So wouldn't you all rather want to go for portfolio B? It is the one that's offering the highest return if you look at the vertical axis, right? Well, the question is, what kind of risk are you taking to get that return? I personally would go for portfolio A, where I'm getting very close to that kind of returns that portfolio B is giving me, but at much lower levels of risk. And that's what we call risk-adjusted returns. And your investment manager of your retirement fund should always be cognizant, and your asset consultant need to be able to make sure that your investment manager are living up to that. portfolio C is the worst case scenario. You're not getting great returns, but you're taking a lot of risk. I think the key thing for me is this quote from Benjamin Graham that he says, successful investing is not about avoiding risk, but it's really about managing that risk. Okay? And that can be done today with the kind of portfolios that one can develop. So just to move towards the end of my section, if you look at your retirement journey as a retirement fund member, you basically have those the start of your career, and as you go through your active working career, you're working towards retirement and saving as much as you can. And I think the key point is here, on that journey, you need to start with the end in mind. And that end in mind is that X that you see there. Now, in our world, what we call that is what will be your net replacement ratio by the time that you get to retirement. And the net replacement ratio is about what is the number of cents that you get out of every last rand that you earned as a salary when you hit retirement. And the general kind of rule of thumb is to try and achieve a 75% net replacement ratio. So for every last rand that you earned as an income before retirement, you should be able to replace that 1 rand with at least 75 cents as you go into retirement. And the reason is because you'll most probably be scaling down on some of your lifestyle kind of requirements. Your children should most probably, in some cases, be out of the house already. And you will most probably also have less debt. So you can actually live off a lower income during retirement. That is typically the goal. And if you can achieve that goal, you'll be able to have a consumption of your retirement savings that will last you until the day that you pass away. So on this point, I just want to quickly touch on the one key issue that's coming up that you need to be aware of. And that's this whole introduction of the two, which is actually a 3-pot system. So the 2-pot system is supposed to come into play on 1 March 2024. And all your retirement savings that you've built up to that point in time will become what we'll call the vested pot. And all the old rules that applied up to now will still apply to that pot when it comes to withdrawals. Okay? So you're still working, but you move between employers, and you want to make a withdrawal when you move between employers, right? Because that's the only time that you can now, at this point in time, make a withdrawal. And that's causing people to show certain behavior, and specifically under this current economic situation. But once you get to 1 March 2024, every contribution that you make then on a monthly basis will basically be split into 2 components. 2/3 will go into what they'll call the retirement pot, where there's no withdrawals allowed. Doesn't matter if you resign from your employer and you move, you won't be able to touch it to the day that you retire. I'm still waiting for some of the unions to understand exactly what this means once it comes into play, because I think a lot of people do not realize that even though if they've been saving as part of the retirement fund, they won't be able to touch 2/3 of that until retirement. And then the other third is this savings pot, where you will be able to once a year make a withdrawal up to 1/3 of whatever you have contributed in that year, or from when 1 March 2024 kicked in. So with this 2-pot system, I personally believe that generally it's a good thing, but there are some risks that actually come with that. So let's take an example of somebody that's built up 200,000 Rand in their retirement pot or in their vested pot, and they are at 40, they decide to move from one employer to another. So we'll look at the 2 scenarios, under the current dispensation, what will happen, and under the new dispensation up to the age of 65. So under the current dispensation, if the member then decides when they move jobs to take the full 200,000, they're basically resetting their retirement savings plan. And they have to start all over again, and making certain assumptions, and how the contributions had got them to 200,000, using those same assumptions, by the time they hit 65, they would only have been able to build up about 1.6 million Rand in retirement savings. Now, under the new dispensation, you will not be allowed to make a full withdrawal of that 200,000. You'll only be able to make basically of whatever you've built up from 1 March 2024, a third withdrawal. Scenario B, if the member says, now I'm not going to take all the 200,000, I'm only going to take a third, and they carry on saving from there, they would end up with about 2.8 million worth of savings. And in scenario C, where they decide to make no withdrawal, they're rather going to preserve and they keep their 200,000, then you end up with the best case scenario. So the key point here is that the first thing is that at least now with your new dispensation, the worst case scenario for this member would be that they will end up with 2.7 million rand rather than only 1.6 million rand, because they weren't allowed to take the full savings. So that's mostly for our younger members going forward now that would apply. And then the next point then is, I think the danger now is that where people were not actually moving between jobs, they will now also be able to access some of that which they would not be able to access before. In the bigger scheme of things, I still think it's better that we do have this 2/3 where you cannot touch it, even though you can now touch 1/3 of what you can. Because some people will say they don't necessarily need it, but they maybe want to pay for a holiday or a luxury item, and they're going to dip into that saving spot, right? Even though they shouldn't, and previously they couldn't. That is where the education of how important it is to preserve will be key going forward. So just to summarize everything that I've said, I think to show you the kind of difference that a few of these elements can make. Let's say, for example, you had somebody that was contributing 100 Rand a month from 1993, and you increased that 100 Rand by 6% every year. So in the last year, let's say last year, 2022, they were contributing 542 Rand a month. If we can get a few things right, if we can make sure that they preserve, if we can make sure that they take sufficient risk, if we can keep the costs as low as we can for our retirement investment strategy, then if we just look at an example of a portfolio that's giving you inflation plus 5 versus a portfolio that's giving you inflation plus 6 over a 30-year period, very different outcome if you started in July 1993 with 100 Rand per month. If you are able to get 1% more of a return because of being in the right portfolio that is well structured, making sure that you're not paying more than you should for that investment strategy, and making sure that the member is actually taking the right amount of risk. If you only get 1% more return per annum, the outcome is quite different over 30 years. The one member will have 416,000 Rand at the end of the 30-year period, and the other one will have 497,000 Rand at the end of the 30-year period, right? It's about a 16% difference. That's fundamental. It can make a big difference in the type of retirement that somebody will be able to afford. So coming back to the outcome for members in terms of making it a little bit more real, if you do not necessarily follow the rules, the chances are that, for example, most members would end up with a 55% net replacement ratio, so you'll only have 55 cents of every last Rand that you've earned. If you do make sure that you maximize your contributions by starting as early as possible, contributing as much, maybe adding something to your retirement annuity fund, preserving your savings, even despite the two-pot allowing you to do that, making sure you're taking the risk that you can afford, not that you think you can or want to take, and that emotional control, right? The chances are very good that you'll get to that 75 cents for every last Rand earned. And the outcome of that would be that rather than in the case of a 55 cents per every 1 Rand, your money runs out at, let's say, 75. If you can achieve a 75% under various, based on various assumptions, you will most probably be able to get to 85, which is more the longevity kind of numbers that the life office tables are talking about. What are the key things to remember as a takeout from what I've just said? I think, first of all, start as early as possible and contribute as much as you can, and take sufficient investment risk, as I've shown you with the different examples, and preserve your savings when moving between jobs, and also do not make withdrawals despite the fact that two-pot will allow you to do that now. And you then just work as long as you can. Most of us will actually just end up in active retirement in any case. And yeah, be aware of your emotions and do not panic every time when something goes wrong. And I think this is where education of members and understanding the difference between risk and volatility is so important. Obtain independent advice and do educate yourself more in terms of getting your financial literacy levels up. Ask someone, read up about some of the concepts, and obtain proper independent advice. And then ultimately it comes down to ourselves. We are responsible for our own savings journey. We as employers can help those people, but ultimately the member comes down to that. Empower them to monitor the progress on their way to retirement, and then, very important, to have realistic retirement lifestyle expectations. So that really is it for the first part of this morning, and we're going to have a quick break now, but I think all we wanted to leave you with these 3 presentations that we've had up to now. Be aware of the kind of challenges that's out there, and also know that there are solutions that is available to try and address some of these challenges.
Thanks, Johan. And hello to all of you. It's lovely to see you. Johan introduced me in a way that's probably fitting, because today's session has a large disclaimer. He mentioned the lessons from the bike that I do, which is a YouTube series that connects cycling with leadership lessons. There will be one coming out because last week, Tuesday morning, at this very time, I was in ICU, having just had a massive bicycle accident, and as a result, I have quite a severe concussion. So if I move too fast or I throw my head around too much, you kind of blur a little bit. I've managed to cover up the bruising with the makeup, and I still have stitches in my head. So normally I'm very articulate and full of spunk. You're probably going to get 80% of me today. So that's my disclaimer. What's also very interesting about concussion is the way it affects the brain is very similar to stress. So prolonged experiences of stress will affect the brain in a similar way to concussion. And now, having done something by choice, involving my bicycle at 4:15 in the morning, that's choice. I now have working memory concerns, I have concentration difficulties, I can't move too quickly, sleep disturbances. I don't think I have this. My son's here, he can tell you if I'm right. Irritability, maybe that's part of it. Am I irritable? No. Checks in the mail. Checks in the mail.
Just call his number.
He's my lift home. So I brought him because I'm not comfortable driving and throwing my head around to look at blind spots. So I brought my driver. So hence why he's here. But it's really interesting to have done something voluntarily and received a concussion, and yet so many of us are living with this heavy degree of stress and experiencing the same thing. Whereas on the outside, I look perfectly okay. Well, I think I look perfectly okay. Thanks for that rousing response. Gee, how's that for taking a woman down? But you can't see inside my head. You can't see inside my heart. You can't see the bruising that's underneath. So when we're talking about mental health and well-being, it's an awkward one because it's an invisible suffering. It's much easier for me to talk to you about a concussion than it is for me to talk to you about my depression. My unrelenting stress that I'm living under that's causing me to be anxious, sleeping 5 hours a night instead of my usual 7. That's taboo. But I'm comfortable talking about concussion. The symptoms are the same. Strange, isn't it? But today what I want to do is to invite you to join me into my helicopter, which will not crash. There will be no diesel involved in skidding the helicopter, and come up with me to a stratospheric level where we can start looking at the organizations and the workplace and what's happening in the big wide world out there. Charlene gave you some of the data points, and I just want to hammer in on some of those. But before we get to the data, and I'm going to ask you to do a bit of a show of hands here, I want to take us back in time for us to look at the workplace and the shifts that have taken place over the decades. Now, given that I'm looking around and I'm making very judgmental opinions in my head, I don't think any of you were in the workplace in the 70s. No? No. Okay, so you let me know when you joined the workplace. I don't think it was in the 70s. Some of you probably had parents in the workplace, and you will remember your parents in this hierarchical structure where you were very much an employee, you had a boss, there were instructions, there was hierarchy, there was an authoritarian structure involved, and that led to a bit of an exploitation of the employees. We saw the rise of the trade unions to protect the employees as a result. In the 80s, we saw a rise more of the competitive landscape in the workplace, where there was a greater focus on efficiency, and the term human resource was born. Remember the idea of being a resource, like gold, something to be used and mined. Employer-employee relationships were far more, they started to shift from being hierarchical to being more on an axis, where there was still hierarchy involved, but closer steps towards realizing that people had talent. So in the 90s, we saw a shift towards the knowledge economy, where people and human beings were valued for what they brought into the organizations, into the workplace. And because they were valued for their knowledge, their skills and their experience, they were seen to be collaborators with the organizational leadership. So the organization itself became more of a collaborative space. I'm thinking some of us joined in the 90s. Yes? Yes? Okay. I see one person owning his 90s status. I own my 90s. Okay, you're just going to ooze into the 80s there. Okay. The 2000s were a significant shift because of the globalization that the internet brought. So we saw the rise of the internet in the late 90s, but the real explosion of the internet created the global workforce. And because we were so much more interconnected, it led to more informal relationships in the workplace and more of a democratic involvement of employees in decision making. So we're seeing a shift now towards the manager being alongside the employees. 2010s, we saw the rise of the gig economy, where people and employees were able to make choices around where they would offer their gifts and their talents. Because the internet opened up the world to us, people were able to offer their talents outside the borders of their own geography. And so choice became a big part of how you would offer your labor into the environment. So organizations had to shift to be more personal and attractive to retain the talent within the organization that they needed. Of course, the 2020s have been characterized by our friend the COVID pandemic, but it just accelerated what was already happening. I personally was a remote and virtual employee way back in 2008 because I worked for IBM. But most organizations only took this leap in 2020. So it was already happening, but the hybrid and virtual world is now something that is part of the way that we need to operate. And as managers and employees, we're looking more at a trust-based relationship. Because there's no line of sight, we have to develop relationships built on trust. So there's a shift in the workplace from really hierarchical to trust-based relationships in the workplace. Now I want you to think about when the organization that you work for was born. When did the organization start? Because you might find that it is structured in the decade that it was born in. Organizations who have sprung up in the 2020s are embracing this remote, virtual, trust-based world. And organizations that were born in the 90s may struggle to transition their policies, their practices, their workplace culture to fit into the world that we're in right now. And employees and employers are paying the price. So those are some of the workplace shifts. I want us to talk now about some of the larger shifts in a kind of themes. So we've seen technology shifting, being the enabler of flexibility, of innovation, of the gig workforce. Diversity and inclusion became a theme in the late 90s, early 2000s, and diversity was a big emphasis, but only more recently have we leveraged inclusion. So the language has changed to being one of let's have different people in the organization and let's create equality within the organization, to now how do we include these voices around the table to help deepen the richness of the decisions that get made. Life balance. If COVID has taught us anything, it has raised our awareness to think about what's important to us and how do we balance this life. And we're going to come back at that one quite a bit. The well-being conversation is highly topical. Why? Because exactly the statistics that Charlene was sharing with you, the world that we're in is suffering. Despite the organizational shifts that have taken place, which seem on the surface to be good, it has resulted in higher levels of mental ill health than ever before. And we've seen a shift towards collaboration and an egalitarian nature of the employer-employee, manager-employee relationship. Less of the power and more of the influence in that space. So it's requiring from leaders a different set of skills than do what I tell you to do because I said so. So collaborative influence is a different animal completely to positional authority. So given all of this, one would think that the global workforce is highly engaged, motivated, and feeling individually seen and recognized. Unfortunately, the state of the workplace is highly stressed, overwhelmed, and anxious. With the American Institute of Stress saying that 80% of workers feel stress on the job, nearly half of the global workforce say that they feel like they need help dealing with their stress, and the other half are saying they think their friends do. They think their friends need help. 50%, I need help managing my stress. The World Health Organization sees work-related stress as the second leading cause of ill health and disability worldwide. And as Charlene mentioned, stress is linked to the physical symptoms of heart disease, strokes, high blood pressure, obesity, diabetes, and back pain. So this correlation is massive. But are all places equal? Where do you think the highest areas of workplace ill health are? Who wants to hazard a guess? First world. Okay. Guesses? Anyone else? What about you guys at the back there? You said UK, okay. What was it? Japan. All right. So the highest degree of workplace stress is coming in Southeast Asia, according to the World Economic Forum. Lowest levels of well-being in Southeast Asia. Best. Where's the best place to work? So look at you. Someone said Europe. Europe? Hawaii. Australia. That's a good idea. Bingo. Yeah, Scandinavia, the Nordics. The Nordics, best place to work. Denmark, Sweden, Iceland, Norway, Finland. So not all places are equal when it comes to well-being. But how about ourselves at the tail end of Africa? Sadly, 40% of South Africans experience high levels of working stress. High levels. And then possibly the most worrying of the statistics is South Africa has the highest rate of depression in the world. Double that of its fellow BRICS country, Brazil. Double. That is a staggering statistic.
This is before the box won on Saturday.
But not all depression and suffering is equal. We may be sharing equality in all sorts of different ways, but suffering is not equal. According to the Institute of Race Relations, there is inequality in suffering with depression. Black people are suffering significantly more than their white equivalents. And more specifically, single, divorced, widowed, and separated people have more incidences of depression than their married counterparts. People who have had early adverse childhood experiences, ACE, adverse childhood experiences as they were growing up, domestic abuse, violence, neglect, malnutrition. As children, this is a predictor of adulthood mental illness. And then let's compound this one more, is that those people who live in urban areas are much more likely to experience depression than those in their rural counterparts. Why? Because of a lack of access to green and blue spaces, the loneliness experienced in a crowd, and the risk and fear associated with a lack of security. Put these three together and think in your workforces, who are most at risk? If you look at your organization structure, your most at risk people are single black people who've come from rural areas to the big city. They are lonely, they cannot afford housing, they are scared, and they may have had a higher incidence of malnutrition or neglect as a young person. They are at risk, and yet we are bringing them into Joburg, particularly in the masses. They are ripe candidates for depression. And if depression feels anything like concussion, I can tell you they are never going to be working at their potential. But also, just because, we're South African, we bring our own flavor to the world. I didn't make these up. So in typical South African fashion, we are able to find the humor in things, and we do so regularly, which honestly I think is our saving grace. So whilst there are extra factors that make this a tough place to live, it is particularly tough if you are a woman. Every 3 hours, a woman dies because of gender-based violence. Every 3 hours. 50% of all women will have been abused at some point in their life. And 20% of all girls before they're 18 will be victims of sexual abuse. And we carry all of these things into the workplace. It is a heavy burden to carry, whether we're conscious about it or we're unconscious. We're carrying these into the workplace, which results in a 10 billion rand loss in productivity due to mental health problems. And as Charlene mentioned, the business impact is huge. Healthcare costs have risen purely on the mental health side, and then the related diseases that come as a result of stress. Absenteeism, increase in accidents. 60% of accidents are related to stress. Inability to concentrate. Moving your head too fast and going dizzy. Let me tell you, that's a real thing. And then attrition. And a lot of the attrition stems back to the access to financial assets that have been trapped in retirement funds. So the only way to access your financial resources is to leave until the two-pot system, which is coming in March, I've just learned. So that's good to know. Be using it in table topics tonight, I can see. So the business impact of stress is significant. And stress and I want to say in Joburg particularly, can be seen as a bit of a badge of honor. If you're not stressed and busy, what are you? Yeah, if you're not stressed and busy, you're lazy. Woo! Ouch. Yeah? So you have to be stressed and busy, else what are you doing? Smelling the roses? So the response to the how are you question is almost always, I'm stressed. Stressed and busy. But if we paused for a moment and understood, what do we mean by stressed? You might find that you're more likely overwhelmed, preoccupied, distracted, anxious, frustrated, or maybe tired. But we don't pause long enough to tap into exactly how we're feeling, and we also don't have the vocab. Our vocabulary is very, very narrow. We generally go with fine, and if we're feeling very expressive, stressed. Fine is our go-to, and if we really know someone well, we might say, I'm busy and stressed. But I do want us to think for a moment, what do we mean by stressed? Because not all stress is bad stress. In fact, if we need a certain amount of stress to get out of bed. We need a certain amount of stress to perform at our best. So we want to get to a level, what we call eustress. Eustress is good stress. Eustress helps us to be at optimal arousal levels in order to get a job done. You know what this is like. You got a deadline in the end of September? Who's got a deadline at the end of September? Yes, everyone's sitting there going, yeah, totally. Are you doing anything about it? No. Might you get there on the 25th of September? Probably, because then I feel sufficient degrees of motivation to actually get to the task. I need a certain amount of stress to perform at my best. But when we check in with ourselves, it's quite easy to both miss the signs or not even realize that you have the signs. I really love this continuum of stress responses, because at any one point you can go, where am I? You've heard of the triage system in the emergency rooms? I assume I was part of that on last week Tuesday. Somebody triaged me. Maybe, I don't know. I was unconscious, I have no idea. Maybe they put a yellow sticker on me and said, injured, but she'll survive. No idea. Yeah, just carry on through. Put her on watch. So being amber or being red in your stress, in the characteristics of your experience of stress, helps you both to identify where you are in terms of your level of emergency response required, and also helps you to notice where other people might be. Because noticing other people helps you to have a degree of compassion and kindness. And I want us to start introducing that language of compassion and kindness, because you just don't know all that much about somebody else's life. What you know is very, very small. So stress is one of the huge factors. Well, I call them the horsemen, the 4 horsemen of workplace mental health. So the 4 horsemen are anxiety, stress, depression, and burnout. And we often group them together and go, well, it's just stress. Well, it's not quite just stress, because they have different emotions associated with them, different causes, and different treatments. So just take a look at that. What is the difference for yourself so that you know? I'm going to tell you a case study, and I want you to tell me what this person is suffering from. His name is Derek. He runs an IT consultancy. He's very effective with his clients. He has sufficient work. He manages his clients really well. He gets to the end of his day and he's exhausted. He will be asleep on his bed by 7 p.m. He has very little interest in anything outside of work, and he battles to have meaningful connection with his spouse and his children. What might he have? Depression. Depression. Because it's that sad hopelessness, that lack of interest in anything else. But functional, highly functional. Here's another one. We've got Mark. Mark is the co-founder of a highly successful business. His co-founder, the other one, is hardly doing any work in the business, so he's shouldering it and has been for the last 8 years. The organization has grown tremendously. They've just brought in a managing director to take over the operations of the business because he is at the end of his rope. There's very little more that he has to offer, and he is barely coping on a day-to-day basis. What might he have? Burnout. You're very good at this. Burnout. That is a classic case of it has been relentless over time building up to an exhaustion. What's really interesting about burnout, it requires 3 things to be present: exhaustion, cynicism, and self-doubt. When we see those 3 coming together, it really is that's when burnout is taking place. And you're probably noticing in the workplace today, everyone's suffering from burnout. But are they really? And it doesn't matter even if they aren't really, but the point is it's the cynicism and the lack of self-esteem. I can't deal with it. I can't see my way through this. I don't think I can. Those are the words of lower levels of self-esteem. I don't have what it takes to get through this. That's an indicator of self-esteem. What's useful to know with these 4 horsemen is that there are different options to treat them. But for you in the workplace to be looking out for the signposts of mental health in yourself and in others. If you are experiencing mood fluctuations, you're seeing other people going from anxious to irritated to loud to back to withdrawn, fluctuating mood. Concentration and focus where it's inconsistent, and the result of this is poor decision making. If you're wondering how people are making the decisions that they're making, it's because they didn't read the fine print. They fell asleep during that part, and then they woke up again. And I can tell you right now, with my current experiences, with my week-long concussion, this is real. This is real. And I'm usually I say this generously, astute. I'm fairly articulate and pretty clever, but this is real. Being able to turn the page and you can't remember what was on the page before, that's real. Fatigue, despite sleeping. I've seen this over and over again. I've heard this in conversation over and over again. How was the weekend? Oh, I just slept the whole weekend, but I'm exhausted. Appearance, changes in appearance, neglecting, weight loss, weight gain, and changes in performance and productivity. Now, whilst these signposts are reasonably visible when we can see each other, we now have this confounding variable, which on the surface looks like increased flexibility, reduced environmental stress, question mark. Yes, improved productivity, yay! Question mark, question mark. Do we really? Are we really that more productive at home? And is everybody? Can we just make the assumption that working from home leads to increased productivity? Even in yourself? Not always. I had a friend that I used to work with at IBM when we were working remote a decade ago, and she just realized she can't. It's not her thing. She doesn't have the self-discipline to do it. So she came into the office every day, despite the fact that we could work from home. She knew she was more productive in the workplace. She needed the people. She needed the rigor. She needed the self-discipline. She didn't have it on her own. And I love the fact that she went, that's me. I'm not good by myself. I need people. So it's not great for everybody. And a one-size-fits-all approach, not great either. The downside of the work from home is it's increasing the loneliness. It's making it very difficult for people, as you rightly said, putting in your own boundaries. Because the blur, the dreaded blur of work and life and email and sitting in bed and suddenly you're driving and talking on the phone, and it is the blur. Big struggle with communication. I don't care who you are and how good you are, you will always be better when you can get feedback from somebody's real face. When we don't have to unmute to say something, mute. It's very difficult with everyone sitting on mute to get any feedback. And then the struggles that people are going through are invisible. We're hiding our mental health. We're hiding the symptoms because our cameras are off and we're on mute. Which then places an increasingly heavy burden on our managers, who might also well be struggling to reach out, to read between the lines, to keep reaching into people, to have intentional connection as opposed to accidental connection. So the signs and symptoms, we get to hide them behind the mask of the virtual background. And now, I don't know if you've discovered these in Teams, they're avatars in Teams. Who's tried the avatar? Look at us techno geeks. High five, techno geeks, fellow geeks. So now you don't even have to really be there. You can put your avatar there and make your avatar wave as well. Everyone who hasn't tried this is now going, really? I can try this too. Yes, you can. But we're hiding. We're hiding our true selves, and as a result, we're making it more difficult for organizations and employers to help. So you might have noticed of the 4 horsemen, the treatment programs. Therapy and medication requires an individual to notice their difficulty and take action. Yeah? I must notice that I need help and I need to take action. Whereas lifestyle changes are things that can be done around them. And that's the case for a culture of well-being, where we can create changes in the way of life in our organization that can foster greater well-being and lower levels of mental ill health. It means that we as organizations need to change our role from being doctors to being fitness advisors. It's a fundamental different role to play in the organization. So we think about our benefits as a doctor approach, health as a going to get a doctor, versus wellness, which is engaging with a fitness consultant going forward into the future indefinitely, so that we can get a level of mental well-being. And it makes sense, because the research tells us when your organization has employees who are mentally and physically well, then we have increased productivity, 12% more productive, so that's concussion, 35% less sick days, and 21% more productive as a result of higher engagement. If you are available to the workplace, you are more mentally able to engage in what you're doing, you will be more productive. So what is well-being? Well-being is holistic. It is looking at physical, mental, emotional, social, financial wellness. It's the full picture of our human condition and thinking, well, how can we be well in multiple areas of our life? Well-being requires proactive engagement. It means not only having access to resources, but educating people about the resources, building awareness, and using the hands and feet of an organization. And the hands and feet of your organization are your managers. The way your organization is structured, you end up with 3 HR people and 120 employees. You cannot rely on 3 people. You have to be using the hands and feet into the organization. Managers are your golden nugget when it comes to staff and employee well-being. And we've got to think about sustainability. So this is not about intervention-based approaches. It is around creating a culture. It's changing the way we do things around here. That's what culture is, the way we do things around here. It's rejigging the benefits and the policies, as Charlene and Johan were talking about, thinking differently about how we incentivize and move people towards owning their own well-being. And it's re-looking at what gets rewarded and recognized within your organization, the behaviors that get rewarded and recognized. As an example, you might have found in your team, I don't know, a manager who says, thank you, Charlene, for taking my call on holiday. I'm so grateful that you were able to respond whilst on leave. Thank you so much. I know it was an imposition. What I've just done, I've just recognized and rewarded a behavior that is completely against the culture that I'm trying to create. Versus another manager, I'm working with an organization, and this is the MD. We were talking about a program, and she said, let's have the meeting, but Karen is away, the HR director, she's away on leave. I'm so pleased she's taking her leave, and it's really well earned. We'll talk, but we won't make decisions until she's back. Voice of the MD. We won't make a decision until she's back. We're not going to phone her on holiday. We're going to just wait. It's not going to, Rome will not burn in between. So what are we recognizing and rewarding as behaviors in our organization? So to make this happen, we need a dream team. The dream team is not a single function. It is not the HR department that gets to do this. But HR, as a mouthpiece of the organization, as a representative of the organization, is part of the dream team. Your service providers need to come on board and be part of this dream team. Your managers and leaders are a critical part of the dream team. And then every single employee is part of the team, because you cannot sit back and wait for stuff. There is none of this in a dream team. There is action orientation and ownership. I just want to give you a couple of thoughts for each of the members of the dream team. And I want to start with this idea of well-being washing, which has been increasingly happening as well-being has become a topic. Anyone heard of well-being washing before? Anyone heard of greenwashing? Okay, so the sustainability movement has now seen a lot of greenwashing where people are pretending to do stuff for image. Now we're seeing well-being washing, where organizations, for the PR benefits, are shouting about their yoga days and putting in nice little Instagram posts of what the organization's doing for PR purposes, and it's about image, not impact. One of the organizations that I've worked with has got a fabulous yoga room. It's beautiful. It's got little rolled up mats and wooden floors and piped music. It's very, very mooi, except nobody uses it. In addition, to complement the yoga room, there are treadmills in the corridors. Very cool. Again, beautiful ornaments. But somewhere somebody can go, I've done something. We're bringing well-being to the workplace. So well-being washing is a major risk. Anyone heard of the triple bottom line? So the triple bottom line is really is a shift for organizations to be looking at how we measure success as an organization. To shift from being just looking at profit and looking far more at our sustainability from a planet point of view and from a people, community, and stakeholders. How are we as an organization measuring our success? So strategically, HR and the organization as a whole need to be taking significant mind shifts to going, this matters, and what matters we measure. And what we measure matters. But if we don't measure sustainability from a planet or a people point of view, it doesn't matter. Groups, surveys, pulse surveys are regularly dipping into our organization so that we solution what is needed, not what we think should be done, what gets offered. What is needed by our people? If we look at our demographics across our organization, our different employee groups, there are very likely to be different solutions that are required. But think about the shift in the workplace over time. We have got to that place where personal solutions are the way to go. Customizing a solution. Not everybody is the one size fits all, and Johan was talking about that with retirement. It's not a one size fits all. We can look at it differently. Leaders need to be at the forefront of action. When there is a well-being conversation taking place, it is led from the front. It is not led by HR. It is organizations, managing directors who are sitting at the front talking about how they're managing their own well-being, their own stress. And very importantly, use the hands and feet, but don't just set them out there ill-equipped. Help your managers to know what is happening in the world of well-being, what their role is, what their responsibility is, and how they can take action to help your employees, not only with compassion, but to drive accountability. And be honest with what you can and cannot do. Because rather be consistent in the long term than intense in the short term. Intensity in the short term is the well-being washing. Big well-being day, woohoo, lots of balloons and yoga mats, and then nothing for 6 months. And then another day, and then nothing. So intensity, we're not looking for intensity, we're looking for consistency. Small cultural changes that can create a culture of well-being, not an event. If we look at managers and leaders, we have to focus on what we can control. Because if you are a manager in an organization, you are not in a position where you can very likely influence policy or the contracting of what benefits provided. What you can control is everything you see in the mirror. That's it. Everything you say, everything you do, your actions, everything you don't do, your boundaries, your choices. That's it. That's under your control. That is it. So as managers, it must start with putting your own oxygen mask on before helping children and fellow passengers. If you're in an organization and you're an employee, you are always an employee first. You are both a manager and an employee. It's check in with yourself. And we want to help you to do that. We have a handout for you, which is a personal well-being check-in. So we'll give this to you as you leave. I really want to encourage you to have a glass of wine / cappuccino / glass of water. Actually, let's go with water. Water is good. And spend some time checking in with yourself. We don't do this very often. We don't look at where we stand because we're so busy looking around that we very seldom look in the mirror. And I want to say this, but I'm not looking at any eyes in particular, but men are the worst. Do yourself a favor. Take the moment to put on your own oxygen mask, because you are modeling behavior to others, whether it's your family or it's your teens, those who are around you. Stressed and busy is modeling. Stressed and busy is the way that we do things around here. So what are you modeling? My picture there of the laptop on the beach, is that what you're modeling? Are you answering your phone calls on a Sunday night when you should be doing something else? What are you modeling? Because that modeling behavior gets caught by your family and by your teens. And what boundaries do you need to personally put in place or reinforce? They are boundaries you know you had at some point, but over the last 2-3 years, you've been caught in the blur. Unfortunately, this adulting thing's quite relentless. No one's going to put the boundaries in except you. And then you can look at what can you influence. So first, oxygen mask, and then it's looking at what you can influence around you. So at an organizational level, this is walking towards uncomfortable conversations. Now, we always need to be gentle and kind with people, because we don't know everything about what's going on in people's lives. So when in doubt, be kind. But kindness and compassion can lead us to tolerating a level of performance that leads to a lower level of productivity, and as a result, overall business performance. Because in our kindness, we might be enabling other people's levels of performance. Let me tell you what I mean. So my nice 2x2 matrix here, accountability is around clarity of expectation in terms of performance, and kindness is warmth, compassion, respect. It is communication. It is how we communicate and the words that we choose. And when in doubt, choose to be kind. If you lack kindness, and you have low accountability. That is a destructive relationship. You are unclear about what's expected from somebody. The rules are vague. Do whatever you want, and I'm just going to gently ignore you. That is a recipe for anxiety and depression. As a leader, if you're not giving direction, and you're also not being kind to your employee, it is a destructive relationship. You are adding fuel to the anxiety fire. If you are very clear on what's expected from people, this is what I need from you, this is the performance standard that I expect, and then when you give them feedback, it's over text. That is detached. As a manager, you are detached. You are emailing your employees to let them know that they're not meeting expectations. Or your cursory remark is, good job. Thrown like a smartie in their direction. Hope you catch it. That is a detached management style. Clear, but lacks warmth. This is the dangerous one, and this is the danger zone that we find ourselves in post-COVID. And with all the mental health concerns happening in the workplace, is that we are extending kindness and compassion to people to the point where, don't worry about it, I'll do it for you. Don't worry about missing that deadline, I did it for you anyway. Or I'll take that challenging piece of work from you because I can see you're not coping, and I'll give it to my high performer who will be rewarded with extra work and more pressure. And as a result of my behavior as a manager, I am enabling your mental health situation. It seems like the kind thing to do, but it is not. You are enabling lower levels of performance in that individual and spreading the burden onto your people who were coping before, but now they're not, because they're doing someone else's job as well. So your talented people are paying the cost, and that leads to higher levels of attrition and spreads the mental health burden. Instead of having a courageous conversation where we're clear about what's expected, we are clear about where people are at and what needs to be done, and we're holding them accountable, but we're doing it in a way that is kind. It is the how. How the message is delivered is kind. It is clear, but it is kind. And that's the quadrant that unlocks performance. It has got to be clear, because we might well be avoiding conversations because they make us feel uncomfortable. If you're avoiding the uncomfortable conversation, you are enabling it. So as managers, clarify expectations. Be clear about what is expected from each person in your team and ruthlessly prioritize. Ruthlessly. When people are overwhelmed, it's very difficult for them to see the wood for the trees. So that's your job. You help them see these 3 things. Don't worry about the rest for now. These 3, that's it. Focus on these 3. And of the 3, this one is the most important. That is your job. Help them prioritize, because you will be able to get performance when people have singular focus. It's when we're trying to do 15 things at the same time that we never get anything done. Clarify expectations, ruthlessly prioritize. Give more feedback. Small bites, given regularly, and sweet and sour. Balance the sweet and sour. You know what it's like to put out a buffet. You want to put sweet and sour on the buffet. Tell people what they're doing well. When you're struggling with your mental health, you need to be told this, that you did. That was so great. Do that again. And the reason it was so great is because. And this is an area that you could be even better. This little tweak, if you just looked a little harder at that, that's going to help you accelerate your performance. Sweet and sour. Forward-orientated, future-focused feedback. And notice when you are avoiding people, giving people responsibility, avoiding giving challenging tasks to people, because that is a flag for you to realize I might be enabling them in their situation where they're at. I might need to increase the pressure so that they seek help. If they're not seeking the help, if they're not leveraging the counseling, if they're not getting the assistance from the benefits providers that there is, the counselors and so on, if they're not getting the help, it's because they don't feel the pain. You might be letting them sit there in the grey space. Avoidance is your flag. So hard times do require furious dancing. And as South Africans, we do actually know how to dance, often in protest, but we should dance more in victory. And we have opportunities now in the World Cup. We will be dancing in victory. We will also need to take advantage of all that South Africa has to offer, because there's so much pain. Let's not kid. But what we have to offer are blue and green spaces accessible to us fairly easily. And the other big thing that probably differentiates South Africa from anywhere else in the world is her people. You do not have to go very far to bump into a friendly face. It can be the checkout lady at the Checkers or the car guard from wherever they come from, Ethiopia. But there are friendly people who are willing to chat, and a recent study found that a predictor of longevity, which means you do need lots of retirement funding, but the predictor of longevity is incidental, positive connection with other human beings. Positive connection. Imagine being in England. Sorry, England, but they're not well known for being friendly. We are known for being a friendly country. We have to get out there and be friendly to somebody else and leverage all that South Africa has to offer instead of just seeing the holes in the road. Look at your organization and listen to the people. What do they say they need? Not what do they want, what do they need? Listen to your people and challenge the organization's prevailing culture, because they may be stuck in an organization that was built in the 80s and is trying to function in the 2020s. Have they transitioned? And how can you play a role in pushing that transition? To partner wisely. Partner wisely with people who are progressive thinkers in this well-being space. Settling for, well, it's always been this way, is just not going to cut it into the future. Partner wisely and partner critically. And finally, do not undervalue your managers. It is one of the most difficult jobs in the world, but they are your voice and your feet into an organization, into your organization. They can care for your employees on a ratio that is impossible at the top or from the left in HR or benefits. Equip your managers to take well-being and to lead a well-being culture into your organization so that the organization as a whole can dance. Because that's what we want. Because furious dancing is required in hard times. Thank you.